talk is titled The Invisible Poison. Invisible poison. So, taken from the Buddhist teaching of the three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. These are the three ways in which we avoid who we are. We avoid reality. We avoid all kinds of situations. We avoid difficulty, pain, threats, inconveniences of different kinds using the three poisons. We attack things, we run away from things, we make excuses for things, and so on. The one that I call invisible, I just do that because it's kind of obvious when we see aggression, pretty obvious when we see passion or grasping or clinging or craving. But ignorance is, its very nature is to be closed off, so it's harder to see that. So I'm just calling it invisible, the invisible poison. Hard to locate it. By the time you see it, then it's not there because you're now looking at what it was covering up. Excuse me. So as a meditator, these are three ways in which you can, if you use these concepts, it's three ways in which you can track your own confusion, your own shutting down on your awareness. We shut down on our awareness as soon as we open our mouth. I'm doing it. As soon as I talk, my awareness starts to recede and come back to what it is I'm talking about. If I look at my hand, I'm ignoring everything else. I might be very clear about, I might even take up palmistry, if I do it long enough. Not really, I already tried that. So invisible, though, shows up in so many different ways when we begin to sit still, examine our minds, and we begin to actually get a clue of the ways in which we keep shutting things off, ignoring things, and we do it through a combination of the three poisons. The one that caused me to start thinking about this was Unyo and I were listening to a books on tape on Audible called Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder, who was a Yale scholar, and talks about all of the people who were killed by Stalin and by Hitler before World War II, during the early and mid 30s, murdered millions, completely closed off from that. Just quickly, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but 3.3 million victims of the Soviet famine. He deliberately starved them. So, hard to grasp. 300,000 victims of the national terror in the Soviet Union from 1937 to 1938. 200,000 Poles were killed Polish people between 1939 and 1941 in occupied Poland. And it goes on and on. 4.2 million victims of the German hunger plan in the Soviet Union. In other words, don't feed them. Don't let them have access to food. And then, of course, the 5.4 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust does not include an additional 300,000 deaths outside of the Bloodlands, or outside of that area between Germany and Russia. 700,000 civilians, mostly Belarusians and Poles, shot by the Germans in reprisals during the occupation of Belarus by the Nazi Germans. So it goes on and on. It's a close to 600-page book. Very, very difficult. We listened to it driving, so it's very difficult to listen to it for any length of time because they just keep running off. And these are extremely well researched from what it says, the reviews in the book. But this is a good example of, and this isn't something, I didn't hear about any of this in history class in school. And we don't, because it's been covered up, hidden, pushed away, ignored. Deliberate ignorance is still ignorance. Deliberately pushing something away. Well, I'm not going to think about that. So it shows up many different ways. If you're having some, on a personal level, if we're having some kind of difficulty with some particular thing, in order to ignore it, we can't seem to ignore that, so we will use drugs. And in this time that we're in now, it's validated. Your doctor will say, oh, you're not feeling good? Well, here, take this drug. Instead of saying, let's go and find out what this is. Even a psychiatrist will give drugs. And I'm not against psychiatrists or therapists or anything. There's no way to say who's being helped by what, but you will know if you're talking to someone who's a therapist and they're helping you in some way, then of course that's not against that. I'm just saying that there's so much institutionalized ignorance going on, a deliberate shutting down. Well, we can't seem to figure out what it is. It goes in circles, so we're just going to put drugs on top of it. We're just going to drug. And then, of course, there's the self-medication that some of us sometimes do, where things get really difficult and we have way too many drinks. Or you might even know someone who just can't function unless they smoke a lot of weed. They have to do that because it's the only thing that gets them out of their difficulty. So what I would say as a meditation teacher, and since I'm an old man, if you haven't noticed, I've been doing this a long time, and I had my own difficulty, my own struggle when I was a young man, and luckily I ran into somebody who said, you could actually look at this. Yeah, but. After I finished all my yeah buts, then he said, no, you could look at it. Very simple. And that hit a chord, or however you want to say it, and I began to do that, and it was difficult. It's difficult because this means that instead of going the other way, instead of drinking or ignoring or doing some other approach to cover up or shield or artificially turn the volume down on some particular emotion, feeling, or perception, instead, with the sitting practice of meditation, I deliberately went in and endeavored to see. This is when I say watch what moves, I'm saying if you do that, if you hold still and watch what moves, eventually you won't be able to. The very nature of this practice, it's very difficult to ignore anything. Eventually, you might even see you might see what the subtle movement is happening there that wants to just cover up or distract. It's very embarrassing to suddenly begin to see the way you've been ignoring, and all of your friends have been watching you do it for a long time, but don't have permission to tell you about it. They're your friends. They're probably not going to give you any harder time than you're already having. In the sense that we don't really know we're shutting it off. We don't realize it. You probably are, if you're reflecting on this, you probably already have an idea of how that shows up in your life, your family, your job, the particular milieu that you're in. And it's just, as the former Vice President of the United States titled his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. It's inconvenient. Some of those inconvenient truths are happening, like the weather situation. We're just ignoring that. And instead of people working together and say, well, let's find out what is this happening, then there's this warfare. The whole white supremacist kind of thing that's been going on in the news, and I'm not much on getting into that stuff in a Dharma talk, but, it's something that we're all seeing every day. It's very painful, heartbreaking to watch people who are probably, at heart, they have families. But even the Nazis had families and children and everything, and the person with their children and their families and everything, they would go to work and kill people, other people with families. Ignorance, actually ignoring our, what should we say, the common word would be our common humanity, killing other human beings. When we see someone that, say, is doing that out of enraged or out of anger, that's maybe a little bit more understandable, but when someone is actually doing it as part of their job to kill, murder, it's very, very difficult not to do a lot of ignoring if you're wearing a military uniform. I wore one, so I can talk about it. I was a Marine for 4 years. And I recall I was in between wars, basically, although the Vietnam War had started. But there was a lot of, at the time I didn't know it because I was sucked into it. But looking back on that, I think how much ignoring it takes to actually do that, even wear a uniform. That is, that of course, what is the modality there? Well, we have to protect ourselves. So we immediately go into the protection. Interesting how we have laws that govern all of that that actually make it legal for some people to really hurt other people. Very interesting. Interesting also how any one of you, if you go and defend yourself and say, well, they did this, they did that, I'm going to take them out or I'm going to kill them because they're threatening my family or something, you will be tried for murder. And I'm not saying right or wrong here, I'm just saying it's a form of ignoring because a whole nation can go and kill. Just like here again, I'm getting a little bit into politics because I watch the news all the time. But just like when we look at the situation with North Korea, go back and if you can find it in the history books where we totally stomped them. These are people who are we're doing all kinds of things out on the coast with our military maneuvers and so on. I mean, of course, they need to puff up their muscles because they feel threatened, or the leader does, who is quite insane. But if you look back during the Korean War, we stomped them. We just flattened them. I mean, not just enough to win the Korean War, which we didn't win. It's still going on. But we went and we bombed things like their dams and their waterways, like kind of a revenge kind of thing. Ouch. This was only 5 or 6 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was another revenge situation. So whole nations are doing ignoring. But what do we do? What should we do? Well, if you're in this room, I'm telling you, I'm suggesting to you, I'm asking you, politely, please train your mind. Train your mind so that when